And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I am the Crypto Crow here with Charles Hoskinson. After a bit of a break, we finally reconnected. We finally got everything situated. We are live right now on YouTube and Twitter. And boy, we've got a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about and go over today. So Charles, man, welcome, dude. It's been a while. You're such a stranger. You're busy.
I know. I'm sorry it takes so long, but one of these days we got to do this live.
We are live right now.
In person.
Oh, right. I know. Yeah. I know. Man, I'm in Tampa now. So if you ever want nice weather and you want to take a break, there's plenty of opportunity. But I think it's likely we're going to see each other at Rare Evo in Vegas. I actually have a meeting with them.
We're right now in a fight with Caesar's Palace because I think they're holding it there about how to get my Blackhawk helicopter there, because no one's ever tried to bring a Blackhawk to Caesar's Palace. Go figure, it's Vegas. You'd think that somebody's tried, but we're like 50-50 on whether we're going to be able to pull that off. But if we do, it's going to be the podcast studio. So we'll do all the interviews.
Oh my God. Charles, when you said that to me in Telegram, I thought you meant an actual Black Hawk, like a bird. I'm used to seeing you with birds and wild animals and shit all the time. I didn't know
No, it's a military helicopter, UH-60 Sikorsky.
Jesus Christ, man. What do you need a Black Hawk helicopter for exactly? Is that for like if wildlife gets too out of hand, you can go up in the sky with your what do you do with it?
The number one killer of billionaires is actually helicopters or cancer. Those are your two things that get rid of billionaires. And so I said, all right, what type of helicopter could I get that's kind of made to be shot down and you somehow don't get COVID'd? And the UH-60 is the platform for that. The other thing is I have a ranch. It's 11,000 acres, and wildfires are like a fact of life. We had 6 wildfires last year. And so I got it and rebuilt it for a firefighting platform, and they call them Firehawks. So we actually have the bucket to dump water and all the other things. And so we use it in fire service and occasionally transport, but it's a real industrial thing. I mean, the Blackhawk is probably one of the most versatile helicopters around, and it can take windstorms. You can land it anywhere. So it's like the Swiss Army knife of helicopters, and parts are really cheap because they've been around for 40 years. And
relatively speaking.
Yeah, I know, for helicopters. And there's a big supply chain of things, and it's just fucking metal. It's so cool to pull up in a Blackhawk and do stuff.
Yeah, I would say so. Does it have a big Cardano logo on it at least, or is it just all black?
If we bring it to Rare Evo, we'll have to put the Cardano sock on the tail or something like that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to wrap that some bitch a little bit. No, that's really cool. I always thought it'd be cool to have a helicopter, even just to go from Tampa to Miami if I ever wanted to. But I gotta wait for Cardano to hit $5 first.
Right. That or the partner chains portfolio, one of the two.
something like that. So now I'm gonna ask some questions, and the questions I'm definitely reading because there's so many that I have to keep accurate. I worded them a good way and things. So unfortunately, it won't be as conversational, I think, on my front, because I want to make sure that I cover things without forgetting them.
Right.
But I do have a little bit of a storm that just started literally 10 minutes ago. So hopefully that won't cause any problems. It shouldn't. So obviously, I met with Gary Cardone yesterday, and I think it was a really good discussion. Like he's a Bitcoin maxi, and the community he's been building has been very much about Bitcoin, but he's very much open to understanding kind of the next generations of technology, right? And so we had a really good discussion, and that's going to actually hit his channel, I think, Sunday afternoon. So for anybody out there that's interested in that, you'll be able to watch that. And we kind of went back and forth, and not as much about the technology side of things, but I guess more or less some of the functionality and things without getting too deep. One of his big questions, and basically what he's kind of started off with is, why Cardano over Bitcoin? And so that's kind of a lot of what we focused on, the differences between, the first generation of blockchain and kind of where we are today in technology. And there are so many misconceptions, I understand, and I see it everywhere. There's so many misconceptions about Cardano, and trying to figure out why that is, right? I think he even had some that, even though he's kind of new to it and just trying to understand what Cardano is about, some of the things that he said, I'm like, no, that's, what article did you read that from, kind of thing like that. And so it's obvious that there's a lot of misinformation being put out there about Cardano. What limitations does Cardano or Emergo have in the marketing towards the end user or retail investor, as it seems most everything targets developers that can more easily understand a lot of the terminology, as the general public is more often led by overall sentiment and not necessarily the tech, because they simply don't understand it. That's kind of the question. He was very, I don't want to say averse to the technology, but it's kind of one of those things where there's a big disconnect between those that seem to understand more about the technological side of Cardano and those that just kind of follow it as something they put money into, hoping number go up, right? So my question is, what is Emergo's real role in terms of establishing kind of market dominance through marketing? And is it intentionally focused or seemingly focused more towards the developers, or is there kind of an end user retail market component in there that we're maybe missing a little bit?
Well, I don't speak for Emergo. It's an independent company. So, I can tell you what I know of Emergo and what their initiatives are, but I have no equity. I have no control or ownership. It's a completely independent entity. So I always put that caveat in when I mention or talk about Emergo. It's the same for the Cardano Foundation. It's a not-for-profit in Switzerland. We don't have any control. They have an independent board, and obviously they have their own money. But in general, the tripartite model, when it was set up, there was this idea that somebody worries about the engineering and science, somebody worries about a lot of the governance stuff and all the ecosystem stuff, and then somebody worries about the growth and acceleration and development of the ecosystem. So that was input, output, CF, and Emergo, respectively. Now, there were a lot of issues in that tripartite model because the community didn't have a lot of say on whether that was done well or not so well. And also the core entities, sometimes we all did a great job, sometimes we didn't, and it created some friction and frustration. So a lot of cryptocurrency people that were in the Cardano ecosystem said, hey, we want this. And if Emergo didn't do it, or the CF didn't do it, or we didn't do it, they say, oh, well, Cardano's a failure and let's move on. It's kind of outgrown the house. And so the whole point of Voltaire is decentralized governance, decentralized treasury management, and new, more representative institutions that everybody can join. And then you have different roles that are negotiated accordingly. So the Chang hard fork, which is almost imminent, what it brings to the table is a complete on-chain governance system, an on-chain constitution, and the endowment of new institutions to take care of things like the budget process that will be done on an annual basis, as well as the product backlog of Cardano as a whole. But then it also opens up the possibility to renegotiate the notion of how we do growth and marketing in general in Cardano. So, there probably ought to be regional and specialized entities to deal with different customer segments, entities to deal with enterprise, entities to deal with the retail people, entities to deal with specific market verticals that we as an ecosystem are interested in. And what's nice is that's a community-wide conversation, because everybody who has data has a voice and a vote, and either directly or indirectly through dApps and institutions, they can express their desires of how much do we want to spend and what's a priority. So right now, the on-chain treasury has about $1 billion worth of ADA, depending on the price of ADA, any given Sunday. And that's at the command of the on-chain government. So it has to decide on an annualized basis, what's the budget? Should it be 100 million going out, 150 million going out, and who receives money and for what, and what oversight do we put into that structure? That's one of the first big differentiators between Bitcoin and Cardano. Cardano actually has its own sovereign wealth fund. It can pay for its bills. And as a holder of ADA, you actually have a say in that. You don't with Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana or these other ecosystems. You just trust institutions and you hope that they do the right job, and you can't fire them when they don't do a right job. And that might be okay when you're first getting started, but when you get to a large ecosystem like ours, it's over 20 billion in value, it's got millions of people, you can't run it with some hope that somebody's going to do something great, because frankly, they're always going to let you down, because even if they make one person happy, they'll make another person unhappy. For example, I'm an American, and when I heard that Emergo just partnered with Huawei, I was like, I don't know about that, man. That's a little sketch. But they're in Japan, and Huawei has a radically different perception in Singapore and Japan than it has in the United States. So that makes their people very happy, but it's not my decision on this side. But if you have decentralized governance, you can really get to a decentralized roadmap, and you can get to a decentralized treasury, and it really helps you start filtering out what those priorities are. Now, when I talk to the community, because they talk to me on a regular basis, usually most of their complaints are around three broad categories as dApp developers and people on Cardano. One is liquidity. They want more of it. So they want sex listings, DEX listings. They want more turnaround. They want more inflow of capital into the ecosystem. Okay, fair. 2, venture capital. They do not like the fact that when they go to a VC, they get their slide deck shredded if the C word's in it, Cardano. It's not universally true, but there seems to be a stigma and bias against and misconceptions, as you've mentioned, about Cardano. So that's another fair point. And 3, there's a strong desire for an improvement in some basic infrastructure, in particular oracles and stablecoins are 2 things that we see a lot. There are oracles in Cardano, there are stablecoins in Cardano, but they're not at the scale and level that people would expect them to be to compete with Solana and Ethereum. So there needs to be some house of upgrades there. So that's already an example of 3 items that require focused strategy and funding behind to go and execute. And when you have a decentralized government, you can say, let's make it a priority. And what's the strategy and who needs to be paid and get these things done? And then there's accountability. Do we solve in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And also allows you to all of industry coordination. So for the liquidity side, for example, you get everybody who wants to be listed on a SEX and as a group approach the exchanges as opposed to individual projects, because when they do that, the exchanges really screw them. They say, hey, give us 7% of the supply or do this or do that. And you just get hammered. So you can approach as a group and say, okay, let's sort out the regulatory and technical stuff, and let's create kind of a fair consideration on the business side. So collective bargaining, really helps you with that. With respect to things like stablecoins, it's starting to get to a situation where there's a nice blending of homegrown versus external that I think a strategy could be evident, and we can get where we need to go. And then with respect to things like venture capital, I think the partner chains framework that we're talking about, what we're planning with Midnight, is going to kind of open that up, because a lot of Cardano ventures will be able to do cross-chain transactions. So you don't enter in saying we have to take the network effect of Ethereum or Solana or Bitcoin. It's not sum zero anymore. They can consume Cardano as a service, like you would a web application, for example. So in that sense, they can stay on Ethereum, but transaction volume still comes to the Cardano applications and value comes into Cardano. So that really helps the discussion, because the VC is no longer thinking, God, is Cardano going to win the layer 1 wars? They don't care. Now they can really focus in on the project itself and say, okay, there's enough to go around here in this cross-chain future. So there's a lot to do, and we've been doing it. And as I mentioned, Chang is imminent, and we're really, as an ecosystem moving forward, the Cardano Constitution is being written. All the governance organizations are really getting stood up, and it changes the role of IO, the foundation, and Emergo. It's up to the foundation and Emergo to decide what their role is in this ecosystem as we move. But for IO's perspective, we're going to look at it as both a venture studio where we build stuff like Midnight, and also as a core developer. And we're now constrained by that intersect relationship where they basically are the accountable party for audit and oversight and the product backlog. And we provide the engineers and scientists with 15 other companies to basically get Cardano along. And we think it'll actually speed up development quite a bit.
So we just touched on so many different elements in that one breakdown. I'm looking at all my questions. I'm like, there's one. So, one of the key things that I think you mentioned was obviously the Treasury, right? And you were talking about Emergo, basically, handling a lot of that. But then there's the decentralized, more governance-focused element of it, where basically the public and the users and the holders dictate kind of where the Treasury goes.
Emergo does not have the Treasury. The Treasury
Emergo does not have it.
No,
this is all just
it's 100% on chain. So
100%
every time you guys make a block, 20% of that goes into an on-chain treasury that's completely controlled by the Cardano blockchain. The reason why nobody talks about it is it's inaccessible at the moment. When the on-chain governance turns on, there's a governance action to withdraw funds from the treasury. So over the last few years, the treasury just accumulated a giant pile of money like a sovereign wealth fund would. And it's an accessible sovereign wealth for the most part. So now we could actually, as an ecosystem, for the first time ever, touch that. Emergo has no say. They have no oversight of that, and they're not responsible for that at all. That is
it effectively like a Project Catalyst type of system that's going to dictate that?
That's where the funding for Catalyst has been coming from. So the on-chain treasury, some tranches go out, and there's so far been 11 disbursements to the various funds, and then the Catalyst voters vote, and they decide where to send it. Well, Catalyst actually, in the future, as soon as this happens, has to request funds from the on-chain treasury the same way everyone else would have to request funds for it. And the on-chain governance is responsible for that. The DREPs, the Constitutional Committee, et cetera, et cetera. So my view is the best way of handling that is through an annual process where all the special interests get together and they make budget requests. It gets aggregated together, and then there's a single vote annually for a Cardano budget. And then it has different pies, like some for development and some for growth and these things. And there's accountability structures, just like you would with the US government in its budget. And then you withdraw the funds, they get distributed amongst many actors, then they go and execute. Catalyst would be an example of a constituent that would request funds. And it's open for the community to decide what is the role of Catalyst now that there's a new Treasury function, which is vastly expanded. Do we continue the same emission rate? Do we continue using Catalyst the way we do it? Or do we scope it down a bit? Or do we continue the same emission? Because right now, the current emission of Catalyst is over $100 million a year, which is quite expensive. And there's probably a more judicious way that the funds can be used.
I was going to say, because it seems like now that we've gone through several Catalyst funds, it seems like there's almost a methodology to gaming the system that the majority of people that have utilized Project Catalyst are privy to. And it seems like you can have, valid, strong use case potential projects that are seeking Project Catalyst funding, but then you have other projects who've already been funded multiple times at different phases of their development, who kind of know the system, and they know, well, you have to ask for this much and you kind of get it in drips, and you have to go about it this way and that way to guarantee your funding. And I'm curious, because if that's then how, potential marketing budgets are handled in the future, like, is this all kind of known in terms of how that works? And are there thoughts to potentially changing the way the system works before it's just set out completely in the hands of everyone in the public?
Okay, so by definition, because the voting system is changing, Catalyst is no longer in charge of the Treasury disbursements. Now, that's being done by SIP 1694 in the Chang hard fork. All the things that are coming in, that means there's DREPs now that you vote for, like stake pools. There's a constitutional committee. There's a whole different governance structure. This committee has carte blanche over how the Treasury outflows go, because it's up to any government to decide on how it does its budget. Now, Catalyst can survive in this, but then what Catalyst would do is it would request on an annual basis, likely,
its own budget.
And then they, just like the NSS gets a budget, they can have their own distribution mechanism for the funds, and that could be the same as Catalyst. But here's the difference. Catalyst is no longer going to be the end-all be-all where every aspect of Cardano funding is under that. It has to scope in, because the annual budget will have different institutions to fund for development, potentially for marketing and growth hacking, and whatever have you, even regulatory funds or these types of things. So it's entirely possible, if the community wants, we could have a discussion about, for example, setting up some marketing funds to do conference sponsorships and growth hacking and hackathons and these things, or what have you. And it's the same with anything, and they can have a completely different governance structure behind it and a different accountability structure.
That's music to my ears, personally.
You're not the first to have grievances, and with any outflow, there's always a positive side. Like, a lot of great projects have been funded by Catalyst, whether it be NAMI or the vast majority of dApps we have, Block Frost, whatever, they receive Catalyst funds. But the problem is, because it tries to be everything to everyone, what ends up happening is it gets a bit diluted. So in my view, what needs to happen is it needs to be less expensive, so not the same level of outflow, and really zero in to a collection of things that Catalyst can do very well. And we use a different governance structure with different processes now that we have a much more powerful voting system to basically handle the annual budget process. The other nice thing is, if people aren't doing their job, you can fire them. When you have an on-chain governance system, people are accountable, and they have to be transparent and publish KPIs about what they've accomplished. If there are delays or issues, then the on-chain government, just like any on-chain government, can say, we're just going to defund that organization and give the contract to somebody else. So there's much tighter accountability that exists.
Just like the government does.
Exactly. Well, a good government like Switzerland would do. Unfortunately,
right.
The U.S. government doesn't ever fire anybody. They just create more agencies.
True. Yeah. Touche.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually really good to know. So, I mean, ultimately, just venturing further and further into a decentralized structure that truly is kind of dictated by its user base and everyone else involved, as opposed to. So okay, that's cool, because I think one of the biggest issues that I see is, even though there's I forget how many, like 1,600 different projects in development now with I can't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head, but there are a lot of projects that have launched. But it seems like some of these projects, they get to completion, but they kind of whimper. And I see some of these projects that could potentially be pretty good, but I have to wonder how many of them are projects for the sake of just having their funding and their jobs paid for to completion. But then after that, there's not much else seemingly gone into it. So they don't have a lot of marketing to really continue building the adoption on the chain.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'd like to see some of that kind of transition out of where we are now. And not on top of that, the number of applications that we're seeing being launched, I'd like to see that grow further, building upon, the user base.
Yeah. And also you need a whole ecosystem. So you need like incubation acceleration. So they have a much easier time getting into venture capital, and they get equity financing for their ideas. You need a lot of people to do consulting with growth hacking and marketing and branding, because a lot of these small guys are technically very good, but they don't really understand what's required for that product market fit. You need the capacity for fail fast and for people to merge. One of the things that we noticed is that there's a lot of replication of effort, and it may be the case that it's better for people just to work together. Like, for example, there was NFT XLV and Rare Evo, and we're like, guys, this makes no sense for two events to be a month apart, and they're totally different management. Is there some way that they could merge together? And with a little bit of a push, they figured that out. And I think it's much better for the ecosystem as a whole. We're at a certain scale where we can tolerate a certain level of diversity, but it doesn't make sense to do 15 or 20 of the same thing. What ends up happening is like 90% of them die. And so that's the point of getting really precise about ecosystem hacking, is you need to have a governance system that has the ability to encourage things to get in the right buckets, and for the people who are good at things to work with other people who are good at complementary things. And then when they're together, their failure rate goes much lower. You're going to have failure. Even all startups, like 90% fail in the first 5 years. Right. So there's no way to get around that. It's like if John Doerr and Sequoia and these other things can't get that success rate improved, and they're the best in the business. Like Doerr did 192 IPOs, and he's helped fund Google and Apple and all this other stuff. It's like, come on, guys, you're not going to win that one. So you have to accept failure, but what you don't want to do is have unnecessary failure, where it's a failure because of unnecessary competition, or a failure because of ego or founder issues or dishonesty or misintegrity or rug pull. And so good governance structures help remove the unnecessary failures inside the system. They also allow you to open up spectrum of partnerships and allow people to responsibly do things. Like there's a lot of Cardano ventures that want to go cross-chain, because Cardano is kind of an economic island, and they want to go cross-chain because it brings investor inflow into Cardano. That makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, yesterday I talked about this idea of a project index, where if you create a smart contract, it could auto buy the top 50 untapped tools of tokens in Cardano. And then you can create an asset from that. And then that could be sold on DEXs as an example. And you could list that on Solana and Ethereum and other DEXs, and it would allow those ecosystems to get an exposure to the Cardano ecosystem.
You couldn't do it on Solana because Solana doesn't work right now.
Well, it'll work through 1/4 of the time. So you could do these types of things, and that's great because it connects us economically, and our projects as an ecosystem do that for us. So cross-chain should be encouraged where and when it's possible, but there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And if they do it in the wrong way, it actually moves people from Cardano elsewhere, and it drains liquidity out of our ecosystem. So if you have some standards and good governance, I think that can all be sorted out. And unfortunately, the ecosystem as a whole has not done a very good job of that. This is where a lot of the criticism of Emergo has come from historically, is that there seem to have been better ways, and other ecosystems like Solana and Polygon seem to have done those things slightly better. And because that was not replicated here, a lot of our projects suffered, and they couldn't get the liquidity they needed, the venture capital that they needed, and the infrastructural support that they needed to bootstrap and get where they needed to go. But crypto changes so fast, you don't have memory for mistakes. You just move forward and you say, okay, well, look, it's a new day tomorrow. The loss yesterday can be a victory today. It doesn't matter. So let's just focus on what we need to do to win. And I think our prospects are very solid because we still are the most decentralized. We have the best on-chain governance system. We have a sovereign wealth fund with $1 billion, and we have a great community. these are foundational things that are immutable. They're not going to change on us. They're here, and they're able to do a lot. They just have to be used wisely and judiciously. So we have to look to the past for where mistakes were made, and look to our competitors and friends for where they've done a good job, and blend those two things together. And I think a great strategy can be endorsed by the community as a whole.
I love all that. I love every bit of that. This question's I actually threw this right before we went live, because there's a big thing that happened, and I just don't think it's getting any traction. People just do not understand, and it's a common misconception about Cardano and transactions per second. And I saw this video. I know you had to have seen it. The cascade of NFTs in one transaction. So what I wrote here is, I recently saw a single Cardano transaction contain over 1,000 NFTs in that one transaction, which could never be seen on any other blockchain. Why do you think so many people believe Cardano's TPS is so low compared to other blockchains? Is it intentional misinformation by competing chains, or is it just a matter of general lack of blockchain understanding as it relates to how Cardano is different from the rest?
Yeah, I think we have an analogy for this. We ran into this with computer processors and graphics cards back in the 2000s. So forever, if you're Zilog or AMD or Intel or whatever, you were always judged by clock speed. And we remember the ads like the Pentium 4 at 3 gigahertz, and now it's 3.2 gigahertz, and these types of things. We're, as consumers, trained gigahertz. So we don't really understand under the hood how the processor works. We just know faster number better. That's your consumer training. It's kind of like cars and horsepower, like 450 horsepower, 500 horsepower. It's like, okay, but is horsepower the only consideration, whether you're fast car, agile car, good car? No. I mean, my Escalade has the same horsepower as my Huracan, radically different driving experience. Okay. So there's obviously some more to the story than just a number. So in the 2000s, we started building computer processors that had much lower clock speeds. Like the Centrino was 2 gigahertz, but the performance would exceed a 3.4 gigahertz processor. And Cardano's kind of that same situation, where you have this accounts-based model, and it's very sequential in thinking. And so the only way you speed up that engine is increasing TPS. Then when you have a different system, which is, extended UTXO, what we do, well, you could have one transaction be 5,000 transactions, hypothetically, inside the accounts-based model. It's almost like you think of a highway, and you can have a single passenger car versus a bus. Now, they're both vehicles. They're both occupying a space in the highway, but the bus can have dozens of people on it. The sedan can have 4 people or 5 people inside of it comfortably. So they're very different things. And so the problem is if you're comparing buses to cars, and everybody thinks there's only one passenger in each, obviously they'd say, hey, the car is better, but there's more to the story. So I think the big issue is that there's a misunderstanding, because consumers were taught the only thing that matters is TPS. They don't understand we're playing a different game. We're buses, we're TPT. You're loading that bus up with lots of people, and we're putting lots of buses on the road. And so what you do instead is you visualize it. And that's why I show extendedutxo.org again and again and again, because then they get it instantly from a picture. They say, oh my God, one transaction had all that stuff happening. Yeah, I interacted with MinSwap, and I issued NFTs, and I moved value, and that all happened in one transaction. You can't do that in an accounts model. So they instantly get it, that the bus is getting full, and they understand that you can get bigger and bigger buses over time, and you can get more buses over time. So this is going to be the dominant model for all the things that need to be done. Now, there's all kinds of other things, like the availability of layer 2 solutions and rollups, and these much better in the extended UTXO world than the accounts world, but consumers aren't going to get that, and you have to create a different metric. So how did they solve it with CPUs and GPUs? They stopped talking about gigahertz, and they created like 3D Mark and these other benchmarks.
12 cores and 16 cores, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they had a number, and the number represented real world performance of the network. So we need to create a throughput metric, just like we did with EDI to measure decentralization. Then you can apply that throughput metric for real world applications on a Solana, Ethereum, these other guys. And then you can actually always give a pair. So this performance at this level of decentralization. So if they have better performance, it might be the case that they have significantly less decentralization inside the system. And then what you do is you always put a reference. You put Amazon Web Services or Azure or something there, and you say, okay, look, they have the best performance. but they're completely centralized, So then people understand, okay, if I'm in blockchain land, I should probably be above this threshold of decentralization, and then we'd always be number one on the metrics. If you look at that pairing, but you can never compare one way or the other. You have to always take into mind, this is your level of performance with this level of centralization inside the system.
And I think that's, honestly, you said it perfectly. Like, create a new metric that people can start looking at. Even if Cardano is the first to implement it or coin the term, I think that's kind of what Cardano is here for in a lot of ways. You're not putting all of the work in your academic approach to building out this blockchain, just to be like everybody else. It's obvious that there's a lot more going on. And I think that is the struggle. We had all these years where certain metrics define the capabilities of a particular blockchain. And now Cardano's going so far out of that paradigm that people just don't really, it's not clicking with people, how it's just different entirely. And yeah, it's like, just like that, it's almost like having 1,000 cores in one CPU kind of thing. It's
right.
it's a completely different metric altogether that I still don't think is resonating with people yet.
And also, your software has to be written to take advantage of those 1,000 cores. This was another big issue when we went multi-core, was that if you were using single core software on a multi-core processor and it was not written to take advantage of it, it actually in many cases be slower than the single core processors that they were competing with. So people are like, I just bought this chip, it's got 4 processors in it, how come I'm not seeing any performance improvement? Well, you have to write the software differently. So Cardano applications, for example, have to be written to fully take advantage of extended UTXO. And in many cases, when they do, they get a 10x in throughput, and they get a 10x reduction in transaction size for these types of things. So if they write it the very naive, stupid way, you may end up inadvertently actually clogging the pipes. And so that's another thing. As a Cardano user, you have to pay attention to the dApps, because it's not just branding and marketing. Some of them under the hood are substantially better optimized to use the paradigm. And it's the same for consumers. We saw this like antivirus software, where if it was only written for a single core, it took like 4 hours for your Norton to run or whatever. But then when they started actually taking advantage of multi-core, then suddenly your AV would run in 15 minutes or 20 minutes or something like that. And so why would you buy the software that runs in 4 hours when it's doing the same thing in 15 minutes? So use dApps that are optimized with Plutus V2 or Aiken or a modern language, and using a modern approach. And almost always you'll get a much better user experience than if you use a dApp that's using the legacy stuff that we launched with.
So, well, I got somebody tipped $10. I'm not used to getting tips. What does Charles think that Cardano must do to increase the Cardano market cap at least back to its all-time high? So I'm going to help you with this, Charles, because I know you don't answer questions like this generally. And I'm going to say it's all going to be explained in this interview. So, there you go. I don't know what else to say. I think people are searching, right? There's all this craziness going on in the world and in the markets, and everybody wants these affirmations that they're making the right decisions by being a part of the ecosystem. And as somebody who's been in it since 2017, folks, I'm not worried. I don't think anybody should be. So now we're gonna get a little deeper in this section, because these next looks like I have 7 questions as it relates to Midnight. Okay. Because I've been following Midnight, at least what I can, and what does end up public. I went through a bunch of the tweets recently from Midnight's Twitter account, and seeing you and your lectures and your YouTube speeches and things like that, you obviously have a pretty anti-globalist elite kind of mentality, where you're all about decentralization. You're against the centralized control efforts of a lot of the players that are just proving themselves to be bad apples and the like. And there is a small part of me that wonders if it is that perception or that opinion of things that somehow rubs the more centralized control mongers the wrong way, which kind of pushes Cardano out of a lot of the key lists and metrics and things, because people know Cardano is more for the people and more for decentralization and less in favor of the VCs that are able to control and kind of manipulate a particular asset. And it almost seems like there's a hustle going on there. Now, the first question I have is, you have an anti-globalist stance on the world in favor of decentralization over centralized control, and are quite open about it. Do you think that that is part of the reason why Cardano is so often excluded in various reports by the media, which always seems to be in favor of the more centralized and or venture capital funded projects?
I think it's a blend of things. One blend of things is that Cardano was founded in Japan, and that's so radically outside of the venture capital, Silicon Valley milieu and New York circles and these things, and so it didn't have those initial founding connection points that were typically from Western media. So for a long time, it was just totally ignored because there was no connection point there. Another thing is our technology is radically different. It's not an EVM clone. It's not a Bitcoin clone. So you have to learn a new stack to play in that world. And for some people, they just didn't want to take the time or effort to understand the competitive differences there. Third, it certainly is philosophical. If you are a proponent of censoring speech, if you are a proponent of centralized control of your money, if you believe people are too stupid to run their own lives, and you want a government to run everything from cradle to grave, or you're a globalist and you want no transparency because you want to run the world, then something like Cardano is a very threatening thing because it's proving at scale every single thing you hate. It's showing people how to be their own bank, own their own identity. It's building a government. It has its own constitution. It has its own governance system, and it's able to become self-reinforcing and more decentralized and more capable over time. If you allow that to grow, it's a cancer in the globalist plans. You cannot have a world system where there's one world government and one world set of controls and ESG all the way down the pipe and all this stuff where a small committee of unelected people get to decide everything if you have like this freedom stack over there with 1 billion users. So when people really understand the philosophy of what we're trying to accomplish, it is a anti-pattern to what the globalists are trying to accomplish. The globalists own the media, and they control a lot of the things. So of course, there's some friction there. We see that with legacy media, not traditionally trade media and crypto media. Crypto media is owned, bought, and controlled by the VC coins. That's just the fact. If you pay enough to play, they write nice things about you. If you don't pay, they don't. Emergo doesn't seem to pay, nor does the CF. We certainly don't. So nothing in the core entities is getting any love. And the community can make a decision if they want to play that game with the on-chain treasury. And if they do, suddenly we'll be on every index. And
Right.
suddenly everything will be great. And if we don't, we'll be left off. Now, the question is that credible? Do people particularly care? Just off of Twitter and social media, we've been able to grow to where we're at and where we've historically been. So maybe it's the case that we just enhance our ability to communicate through social media, and that's all we need to do. Because frankly speaking, it's like, yeah, we could buy a CoinDesk or a Cointelegraph, or yeah, we could start a media organization and do these types of things, and yeah, we can play the index game. But ask yourself what durability that has. If you look at the top 10 of cryptocurrency year by year by year, correlate that to the crypto media, the indexes, and the best entrepreneurs and all the vanity things they've done, you've noticed that the traditional winners there are not around in 2 or 3 years, because there's absolutely no connection between those vanity metrics and survivability and durability of the project as whole. So this is a real community-wide conversation of what is effective, good branding and marketing. Who are the people that we have to convince and win, and what type of customers do we want in the ecosystem as a whole? I have opinions about it, but I'm just a guy, and Cardano is a big tent, and there's a lot of various people. I would caution people against, though, trying to turn Cardano into a meme coin, in that the only exercise is make the number go up.
Right.
There's 2 ways you can make the number go up. In one way is you can inflate it temporarily, and then everybody dumps, and it's a Ponzi scheme. The other way is just through organic growth inside the system. More transactions, more TVL, more use cases, more capabilities, more customers, more reliance, bigger tent. If you do that, it stays. And that's the game that I think we as an ecosystem should play. Again, it's not my decision. It's the community's decision as a whole, but I won't participate in the first. So if they want to go in that direction, I won't be here. Wish them best of luck. In my view, it's Dogecoin or, some other system like that, which just great, but everybody in that system is clearly just there to dump. They just want the number to go up, and then they'll have their exit, and who's the useful idiot who buys it? Good luck to them. It's not ethical.
I kind of look at Cardano in a sense as kind of a new generation of Ferrari, right? Like, and there are two. Personally, I would love to see marketing efforts split between the developer target and the end user target. And I think one of the best and easiest ways from my perspective as an end user and a long-term supporter, to understand what Cardano is being designed and built and capable of is by shining significant spotlights on the applications that utilize that functionality, which right now I feel we don't see a lot of. And so, you know, if we have, you know, applications that are utilizing, you know, like 1,000 cores, and they're doing it in an effective way in a use case that the general public can utilize and understand, shining a consistent spotlight on those applications can preach that gospel without getting super technical, right? It's just showing, look what we are doing that these other blockchains aren't capable of. And then if they want, they can ask further questions as to, well, how does that work? And why does it work that way? And why is that so different than everything else I'm used to seeing? But, you know, that's definitely, I think hopefully that'll start really happening more and more as more of these applications continue launching that are kind of in the pipeline right now.
Yeah, but and it doesn't stop us from marketing. You know, once you have a community treasury fund, maybe we go to Dana White, we sponsor UFC. You know, there maybe we can go and sponsor, you know, some big event, whatever. That can happen. There's just a question of what happens afterwards. What funnel do they go into, and what are they being told, and what's being said? You know, and so really the community as a whole has to drill down to the top 3 or 5 value propositions and the things that make it unique and what people can do in Cardano that's exciting and fun. And it doesn't have to be all business. It could be GameFi and metaverse and these types of things, because let's be honest here, like the vast majority of us spend an enormous amount of time as a society in video games and in recreational experiences. And
I didn't just beat Dragon's Dogma 2 days ago. That did not happen.
Yeah, exactly. Look at Baldur's Gate 3. There's like millennia worth of playtime from the user base there, and there's still hundreds of thousands of people concurrently playing that game. It's unprecedented to see that level of participation. So if you get a game like that on Cardano, that could be a huge win for everybody, because those people won't just stay in that game world. They'll have the infrastructure, they'll be in the same forums, they'll be talking to people, and then they might get interested in a social network on Cardano or an OpenAI competitor that's doing a decentralized LLM, and they want to have a censorship-free experience when they ask AI about stuff, and maybe they want to have a historically accurate Pope picture or something like that. You know, you get that stuff, but you have to bring people in the tent, and they have to be aware of it. I don't particularly care how they get aware of it. They can get aware of it through sports or through video games or through Fortune 500 businesses or what have you. It's many roads to Rome. We just want to get them to Rome.
Yeah, it's funny you say it's UFC, because I see the VeChain sponsorship on the mat all the time, and I'm like, you know, that's cool for people in the know, but otherwise, who cares? It's just a weird name on a mat, you know, and it's like, it's not necessarily connecting with anybody or reaching anybody. But if VeChain had kind of a flagship application that would be of interest to everyone, then that ultimately, I think, would be a much better target for everybody. Like you said, where do we funnel the traffic? Where do we funnel the people? I definitely believe it's more about use case, because otherwise, who are you targeting by just saying VeChain on a UFC fight mat? It doesn't really seem to do anybody any good.
Yeah, exactly right. And so what if there was an application stack where you can like bet on the fighters real time or tip them while you're watching using Hydra, or, you know, these types of things, or there's an NFT connection to it, and the NFTs trade based upon performance. There's all kinds of augmentation. So that's a partnership that I think could produce a lot of value if it was done correctly, because
Absolutely.
they would use that as a way of engaging. It would make Dana quite a bit of money, the fighters quite a bit of money, but then more importantly, it also creates a platform like fantasy football where you have millions of people who are watchers using it. So I could imagine that happening, and that's an example of a potential strategy. I'm not advocating we do that. I'm just saying that's an example of a potential strategy, you know, for people. And if people think it's a good idea, then
I've been thinking about doing something exactly like that for 3 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine trading an NFT for one fighter of another fighter for keepsies, right? I bet my fighter's going to win. I'll put my NFT on the line. Oh, my fighter lost. I lost that NFT. But there's a transaction fee associated with that.
Or imagine that the fighters lose their NFTs if they lose. And so if you beat somebody, not only do you beat them, you get their NFT. So it's like, hey, I just stole your manhood, man. I just took it from you. So there's a lot you can do there with these types of things, and it may enhance the experience. And the thing is that in a big tent, I think about it from an academic engineering protocol level of how do we make the technology able to enable that vision. Then the community thinks about it from their particular subject matter expertise. So obviously you have a different one than Hosky does, or the financial market guys do, or whatever. Everybody has a different life story and experience. And the point of decentralized governance is saying, can we blend those stories together, find common themes, and then create a unified budget and process so that we can go and pursue that? And then it comes downstream to me, and I say, okay, well, what technology do we need to make that happen? And what's the best approach there? And in some cases, we hybridize things. Like partner chains, for example, we hybridized with parity substrate. So we brought the whole Polkadot ecosystem into the Cardano orbit, and we enhanced and modernized certain things. But then we also took advantage of really good design ideas there, which sped up parts of the roadmap. And in other cases, there's like Zcash came up with Halo, and there's some good ideas there. So we're bringing that into the Midnight orbit, which allows us to have best-in-class recursion and other things for snarks and for zero knowledge infrastructure. So it's not just about can we invent it here, it's also can we bring things into our orbit and then as an ecosystem take advantage of it to execute a commercial vision that we have. And that commercial vision is everybody's property. There's no one person owns it. So everybody brings something to the table, and the synthesis of that is what the annual budget basically reflects. And we just go and try to get it done.
Now, I'm going to venture a little bit into my tinfoil hat perception of some things. So as I was going through Midnight's update, on Twitter, and I did a video where I was breaking down all of the use case potential that's being discussed, that Midnight on Twitter has put out. I was actually kind of shocked. And I was shocked in that, what I was alluding to earlier is kind of your stance against kind of like a lot of the centralized control, the kind of globalist elite, blah, blah, blah. But then I as I'm reading through these things, I'm seeing a lot of use case potential that would supplement some of those efforts. And so my curiosity is, so in my mind, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, okay, Charles, I'm guessing Charles is seeing that some of the neglect, I think, from the general market, obviously some of that having to do with it being highly competitive against other projects, other chains, and their interest in pumping money into misinformation campaigns through paid articles and things of that nature. But then there's the other element to that basically says, well, we can't control Cardano, so we don't even want it in the conversation. But then if I were the spearhead of a particular blockchain, maybe I put some things out there that say, you know what, we're going to be so decentralized that these are some of the use case potential for governments and right. Maybe some of these elements that maybe they don't look so comfortable on the face, but maybe there's an ulterior interest or motive behind discussing those. And so I thought I would bring that up to see what you had to say about it.
Yeah, it's an important question. And I think what happens is that people just fundamentally misunderstand how privacy works and how one builds these types of ecosystems. So what ends up happening is that the minute you start talking about concepts like selective disclosure, escrow keys, these things, people say, oh, that must mean it's at the protocol level and there's a backdoor in Midnight. That's not true. Midnight does not have a backdoor. There is no escrow key, universal God mode inside the system. We do have those. Intel puts it through the Intel Management Engine in your processor, and AMD puts it in, and Apple has backdoors, but we don't do that at the protocol level, okay? So full stop, there's no backdoors in Midnight. But here's how business works. Every business has a public side and a private side. Public side is what you reveal to the general public. We're McDonald's, we make hamburgers. Okay, great. Does McDonald's, your franchise, reveal how much you pay your employees, how much money's in the cash register, who's working, the schedule? That's private logic disclosed to the people within the organization. So the problem with cryptocurrencies is they can't keep a secret right now. They can just give you the public side of things. So what we do in practice is we take all the private side and we sweep it into a centralized entity. That's what we do, which basically, because you need both to work, means you're not a blockchain application. It's been completely compressed into one central server. They pretend to be blockchain, but the private side is not. Midnight is the first time ever where you can design your business and your disclosure regime. Now, as design, you can have no disclosure regime. It's anonymous to everybody. Or you can build it in and say the escrow keys will go to HR or to the CFO or to a regulator or something like that. So here's an example, a security token. You have broker-dealer registration. You're a regulated product. You are a security. You're admitting you're a security. It's not like, hey, the SEC said so. No, you've actually decided to go down that road. It's a company. It has a promise. It has a centralized issuer. So we're saying that that company, even though they have a regulatory disclosure requirement, should not be able to interact with or have any view of the shareholders of the company. Wouldn't that violate law and statutory requirements and these types of things? So we're going to issue a security token, but be out of compliance with securities laws, in which case you're not legally allowed to trade it. And it's not valid. So what do? How do we bridge that gap? Well, you build a system that allows a person to do that. Now, is that protocol level, meaning Midnight has a backdoor that they've reached through? No, that's dApp level. You, for your token and your dApp, built that disclosure regime into it, and Midnight, the toolkit, enables you to do that easily. What does this translate to? Trillions of dollars of real-world assets work their way into the blockchain space that right now can't enter because blockchains are fundamentally incompatible with these types of things, but also allows you to innovate a little bit. So just yesterday, Uniswap got hit with a Wells notice. Well, if Uniswap could do everything differently, maybe they would want to create a regime where they blacklist US participants so they wouldn't have to deal with the United States. So how do you do that in an algorithmic and automated way as a dApp? Well, here's what you do. You have what are called anon-creds and zero-knowledge proofs. And what you do is before you can send money in, you have to provide a zero-knowledge proof that you're not under US jurisdiction. You don't reveal who you are. You don't reveal any personally identifiable information. You're just revealing that you're not US citizen. Then you're allowed to freely trade with everybody. And Uniswap, the operators there, can prove to any regulator asked that there was never US participation or US customers involved in that trading. And this can be done in a completely automated way on chain. So you can have a regulated DEX that's still automated and it's still a smart contract, and you've blacklisted a particular domain. Business logic. Maybe you only want people trading in a marketplace who own your NFT. You could use the same logic for that. Maybe you want to have a disclosure regime where people who are members of your NFT get to see it. Or maybe you're a musical artist and you have super fans who buy all your albums and do things. Maybe they get private releases of music and everybody else doesn't get that and they can't see it. Well, that's a disclosure regime, right? So that's the point of Midnight, is to create a framework so that people can build that type of stuff and they have assurances that the disclosure logic that they've put down is ironclad. Super important for analytics as well. So I have a clinic in Gillette, Wyoming. We have 7,000 patients at Hoskinson Health. We have all their medical records. I'm not allowed to share those medical records, and I can't do anything with those medical records other than have them. Well, what if we could work with the patients and we could build a regime where we could have that data be analyzed and the patients could be paid for that, but in the analysis, none of their personal identifiable information gets released. A lot of pharmaceutical companies are interested in that. And if the patient can get basically free money and they know that there's no privacy concern there, a lot will say yes. And it creates mutual value on both sides. Okay, well, how do you do that? In a centralized way, you give all that data to Bob. You hope he's trustworthy and you hope he doesn't steal it. With Midnight, you can do all of that on chain. And that entire regime's there. And you have math-based guarantees that your data can't be shared. But the semantical richness of it can be shared and you get paid for that. And that can all be a smart contract. That's why we built this, is because that is real life use cases, whether it be carbon markets or supply chains or healthcare, it be automated regulation that exists with these applications. And you'll notice no government has a backdoor. The only time people can disclose is when the dApp developer decides who is the disclosure regime. They can say no one but the user. They can say the user and the dApp developer. They can say the user, the dApp developer, and Uncle Bob, who's the regulator. They can say whatever inside that. That's programmability, and that's the power of programmable privacy, is you can build these types of things and put them together. And as a consumer interacting with it, you get a math-based guarantee that what you see in the disclosure regime is the disclosure regime. The problem right now is you don't know. You give it to Google, and then Google shares it with the CIA or the NSA. You give it to Google, then Google shares it with the FBI or whoever, and you're never told that it's been shared. It just disappears in some end user license agreement, and we never know. Also, the problem is almost all these regulated business become inadvertently warehouses of data. So when you go and interact with an exchange, they have to do KYC and AML. And what does that mean? They know a lot about you, and they have to hold on to that for 7 years or longer. What if they get hacked? All your personally identifiable information gets leaked. With a system like this, settlement is compliance. So if you send your funds there, if it settles, you sent your funds with a bunch of zero knowledge proofs that proved properties. For example, when you go to a bar and they say, hey, I want a drink, what do? They say, oh, show me your driver's license. So when you show it, you're not just proving your age. You're telling them your name, your address, whatever the hell else is there. A zero knowledge proof just proves a Boolean. Are you at or over the age of 21? That's it. So you play a game of 21 questions in this model. Are you in a U.S. jurisdiction? Are you at this age? Are you Reg D exempt investor? Or this. Enough? Yes, it settles. There we go. Now, I, as the operator, I don't know anything but what I've asked. I don't know your name. I don't know your address. I don't know anything.
And your willingness to provide it.
Exactly.
That all makes sense to me, Charles, and I get all of that, especially when it comes to healthcare and the medical fields and things. But specifically, some of the things that I was referring to are well, and you just kind of gently brought it up, is enabling frameworks for verifying the tokenization of carbon credits, right? That I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Empowering organizations or governments to build ESG tracking platforms for customer feedback and participation, et cetera, which that one really threw me. So
well, let's talk about that. ESG. So let's say you're one of these eco hippies, you love battery power cars. Maybe, just maybe, you want to know the lithium in your battery power car was not mined by human slaves in Congo. There's the good part of ESG, there's a bad part of ESG, but that certainly is something I think the 99.9% of human beings would agree. We don't want to buy lithium mined by slaves in a country. So wouldn't it be nice that when you look at that, there's a proof that somewhere along the way, certain people have vouched for that supply chain that are credible transnational organizations to audit it and verified that child labor wasn't used, slave labor wasn't used, sex trafficking didn't happen, these types of things. Well, how do we normally do that? Normally, what has to happen is a hyper-invasive process begins and some transnational body comes in and they audit these organizations. And your ability to procure that audit basically determines whether you have market access or not. So what happens with those transnational bodies? They become too powerful. They can mandate terms to people in developing countries and basically tell them, hey, if I don't audit you, I don't give you this little stamp of approval, then you can't sell your products anymore in these places. So they end up becoming the kingmakers and they get monopolies off of ESG. Well, when you create marketplaces for this and you create a proof system, you can have much more diversity in your verification of claims. What ends up because of that, you break the centralization up and you have much lower cost to verify claims. It's the same with the textiles business. When they dye these shirts, man, they're devastating. You look at the cancer rates next to textile mills where they're processing fibers and they're dyeing fibers. You have such a 35-year-old people die metastatic brain cancer all the time and other things because there's so many carcinogens and toxins that exist in these things. So there's a global movement right now to prove that when you buy clothing, that clothing is sustainably produced and it doesn't kill people. The same for e-waste. So I want to live in a world when you buy a product, you can scan a QR code on that product and it tells you the story of it. That's what supply chain ESG is really about. Okay. And you can ask questions like, was this made by slave labor? Was this fair trade? Was this environmentally sustainable? These types of things. And you should be able to get answers to that. Some people care about the carbon. Some people don't. But everybody's got something. But we see these preferences in ancient times too, right? Is it kosher? Is it halal? How was the food prepared? We as humans have asked these for thousands of years and we create systems for that. The problem in a global supply chain is sometimes you don't know. And when you don't know, it can hurt you. Look at the baby milk with lead that came out of China, and these other places. So we want to live in a world where when you scan something, you can know the provenance of it. You can know who touched it, what they did with it, and how they treated it. The only way you can live in that world is create a world where the disclosure of these things doesn't lead to monopolies and it doesn't lead to predatory business practices or competitive espionage. Apple does not want Samsung to know how many iPhones it's getting ready to build. Samsung doesn't want Apple to know what goes in their cell phones until after it's been released into the market. So when you have technology like this, you can prove properties of your technology, properties of your supply chain, but you don't reveal competitive stuff inside the supply chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. I think in general, as I was going through a lot of this stuff, there was one thing that came to my mind specifically. I mean, because it's obvious that when you're building something like this, I mean, just the very nature of it is, even if you were to look at it as a tool, right? You can use this tool for X, Y, or Z, and there's no real, just because it's powerful and capable, it doesn't mean that, the technology itself dictates its use. Okay. And I completely understand that. But in the grand scheme of things, a lot of what I see as it relates to midnight, and I've said this several times because I believe it to be true. Maybe you'll argue me and tell me I'm wrong. I'm always right sometimes, Charles. You know that. Is how effectively do you think something like Cardano or Midnight could be used to bring in CBDCs? Because so much of that technology, while I know that the focal point of it is to be centralized and controlled and so forth, I still see a lot of avenues down Midnight and some of the ways it's being designed and all of these things. And I see how a CBDC could be rather effective on a lot on both, really, if I'm honest. So is that something that you're cognizant of? Like, is this something that you've taken into consideration, or is there any reason why you might be saying absolutely, and I hope they do? Like, what is your stance on that?
Okay, so first off, if you truly believe in decentralization, you can't say I believe in decentralization until it violates my principles, and then at that point I get control and I get to centralize it and say no. If it's an open platform, you have a bunch of tools. There will be good and bad use cases on it. Bitcoin is this way, Ethereum is this way, Cardano is this way. If I had my preference, I would have tried to get rid of OneCoin and BitConnect and these types of things. But that's the consequence of it. So is it possible to deploy a CBDC in a ledger like Midnight? Sure, but it's certainly possible to also do that ZK Sync or other systems as well. And honestly speaking, the more likely scenario is that a CBDC would be run by a centralized ledger or a permission ledger like a Fabric, because they would want total control over it end to end. And they want to put protocol level backdoors. There aren't protocol level backdoors in Midnight. So that would put it low on the list of the implementation in practice when you talk about it. But then let's talk about an ethical CBDC. People don't have problems with CBDCs from the perspective of use, utility, and convenience. They have problems because you have transaction discrimination. So they discriminate based on who you are and what you're buying.
Exactly.
So
that's what bothers me.
That's what kills me too. I don't want to live in a world where we go to a gas station. I got my truck, my 2500 Chevy, and I go to fill it up with some diesel, and it says, well, you've already bought too much diesel this week and you're not allowed to buy anymore. I don't want to live in that world. And that's the world that the ESG people are really pushing for. When you go to
I don't want AI telling me that I am not allowed to buy any more gas because I've driven my car too much and my carbon credits or whatever have been drained.
Right. And so systems like Midnight intrinsically are moving the opposite direction of that, because it gets harder and harder to know who you are and what you're buying with these types of things. So it's not the ideal technology for it. You could conceive of it with this tech stack, but they would much rather have a system where they have end-to-end control, protocol level backdoors that are inside the system. And they also run the ledger, and they can freeze and reverse transactions. You can't freeze or reverse transactions in Midnight in its instantiation. You can build it into a smart contract, some sort of scheme for that. We're using multi-sig, but generally speaking, it behaves like a blockchain, and that makes blockchains not suitable for CBDCs, which is why it's always a separate conversation. And in practice, even when they try to start with a blockchain, they tend to abandon it. For example, I was at the Swiss ambassador's house last year in DC, and the head of the People's Bank of China's digital currency initiative was there. So he was building the CBDC for China. I first said, hey, how big of a pilot is it? He's all very small. It's only 200 million people. So only in China is like a 200 million person pilot small. But they're building as a public-private partnership. Tencent is working with the PBOC, and they have a strong AI stack they're pulling in with social credit. So they're putting all those pieces together. So I said, are you using blockchain?
You're doing my biggest fear here in the States.
Exactly.
I wasn't aware of that, but it makes sense.
And so I said, hey, are you building on a blockchain? They said, we started with a blockchain, but we abandoned the blockchain component. So there's kind of a blockchain component, but it's a centralized server running the whole thing. A, because of the performance requirements, but B, because of the control requirements. The government basically wants to have God mode. God mode is not compatible with decentralization. So that's why we built things like EDI, because we wanted to create a world where every product is decentralized by default. The more decentralized, the harder it is to put God mode inside the system. And that makes it then not compatible with what CBDC social credit people want to do. Social credit also requires an ample amount of data of your users. If you move into a system that's privacy preserving, you lose unless they disclose all of that information. That's not compatible with how government works. They want to do dragnets and mass collection. They want hidden repositories of huge amounts of data without your consent to be able to harvest that data and use it. So this really is the fight of our time. And that's why I'm trying to move people into systems where you have to consent to give. And instead of it's automatically done and you have no way of opting out, which is unfortunately the way that Web 2 currently works for almost everything.
Right. Good. I like that. I like that. I like those answers, Charles. I still like you, man. I'm still down. No, seriously, I was reading some of this stuff and I'm like, what the hell am I reading right now? This shit is blowing my mind. I wasn't expecting to see some of that stuff, but I do understand. And like anything else, there's always two sides to any sword, and it can either be used to protect your home or rob a village, I guess. It just kind of depends on what your motives are with it. What major applications do you see Cardano and or Midnight becoming the backbone of by 2025 and 2030, relatively, respectively?
Well, the service layer is really where the big stuff lives. So I want computational privacy for everybody in the cryptocurrency industry. So we can start getting rid of this off-chain privacy, which translates to centralization and control and spying. But going beyond that, I also want decentralized large language models, because it scares the hell out of me that I don't have a historically accurate Pope. And I know where this is going. And K through 12 is going to basically, all the kids are going to get educated with these things. And they're going to have one very narrow view of reality, which is not accurate. It's just basically decided for them. So I think it's a moral imperative that we have uncensored, unaligned AI in a centralized way that is accessible as a public good for everybody, so that a ministry of truth doesn't decide that. You need a cryptocurrency for this. Well, that's why the service layer exists. That's why partner chains exist. So Midnight shows the way, but very shortly thereafter, you can have a decentralized LLM. Decentralized social media is another thing. I love Elon Musk, but I'm sorry, you don't trade one dictatorship for another dictatorship. And even if you politically agree with the guy, or you think his heart's in the right place, we learn, like when they take the ring to Mordor, Frodo even has a hard time throwing it into the lava. So the bigger and more prominent it gets, the problem is there's always going to be these exceptions to the rule that start violating the principles of free speech and free expression. You can't trust people for this. So you have to have protocols preserve this. So we need decentralized social media. That's why the service layer exists, because it's just for Cardano people. No, I want to broadcast everybody in the entire cryptocurrency and legacy world. So the service layer allows you to do that type of stuff. So decentralized social media, decentralized telecommunications like World Mobile, decentralized AI, decentralized privacy, these types of things are requirements. We built partner chains for that. That's a big focus of my company, is to partner with people or incubate through the venture studio that we have those ideas and get them into the commons and get them in the hands of hundreds of millions of people. Now, the core of Cardano, I say there's three big areas that we need to get where they need to go, in addition to the governance stuff that's happening right now. Governance, super fucking hard, never ends. When are you happy with your government? No one's ever happy with their government. Even the Swiss hate their government. It's a pretty good one. Okay, so governance is always going on. But the three big areas that we have to sort out, one is scalability. We've achieved a lot. We have an amazing system, but now we have to fully realize that system. And there's great protocols like Ouroboros Leos and Ouroboros Praus, Hydra, these types of things. Introduction of zero knowledge into the workflow gives us rollups that basically make us best in class. And we get better throughput no matter how you measure it across the industry. So that's one big pillar. Another big pillar is the economics of transactions. So when you drive on the highway, sometimes there's toll roads, and then other times there's like carpool lanes and these things. So right now, everything's
all tolls in Florida.
All tolls. And that's how they pay for shit, right? That's no state taxes. You got to figure out, different ways to make money. So you notice, okay, well, this is a common resource, so we have to have more intelligent ways of pricing things. So there's papers we wrote like tiered pricing and Babel fees and other stuff. We really need to clean all that up, because the current transaction model is not fit for mass scale. If we have billions of things happening every day, and they have different settlement requirements and things like that. Like if you're a shipping company and you're Maersk and you're moving stuff to the port and you arrive at night and you don't unload the ship until the morning, do you really care if your settlement time for your check-in is 15 seconds when you have 8 hours or 10 hours before you have to use the data? That's a world of difference than you're standing in front of a vending machine or a cash register or an ATM, and you want that to be as fast as possible so it clears and you can get your food or you can get out of the line, right? So these are both could run on the network, but because they have different settlement times, there should be a marketplace that allows people to kind of fit where they sit, and then helps you get the right pricing structure for it and load balancing inside the network. The NFT drop guys run into this all the time. Okay, so that's the second big area that we need to make innovation progress in. The third big area is that we're getting to a point where the only way you're going to achieve global scale usage is you have to admit heterogeneity in the network. And what I mean by that is you have to have different types of nodes and different assumptions about their capabilities. The vision of Satoshi is everybody's equal. It's homogeneous. Everybody runs a full node. That's not practical. You can't like grandma's going to run a full node on her cell phone, and it doesn't make sense. Okay, but the problem is that when you deviate from that security model, then you may inadvertently introduce hypercentralization in the system. And this is what you see with Solana, for example, or these other guys that optimize for performance and throughput. So how do you get a full node experience for everybody in terms of safety, security, and decentralization, but everybody can be a light node experience in terms of user experience? If you can do that, you can have a network that's massive, billions of users, billions of different devices, and everything, it just kind of works its way out. So Mithril is an example of a tech stack that moves us in that direction. But there are other proofs that we can bring in and structures we can bring into Cardano to accomplish that. And then you can kind of live in this lazy world where you don't really track it, but if you wanted to, you could, and you can always know that what you're looking at is accurate and right. Now, the minute you do that, your performance goes up 1,000x inside the system, because you no longer have to build around the assumption that everybody's equal and everybody has to keep at the same pace. It's almost like, highway. Right now, everybody drives at the same speed limit, but maybe it's like the Autobahn where you have lanes and you can go as fast as you want. The problem is you lose those cars. And so how do you build a highway system that has slow and medium and unlimited and let people run at the pace that they feel comfortable of, and then create a proof system where no matter what, you can still track all those things and get them where they need to go? And that's what we're working on. So those three big things on the Cardano side, I think, open up massive possibilities. It'll make us the number one chain for NFTs. It'll make us the number one chain for DeFi. And then also, I think it's going to be the cheapest chain for people to build applications on. So it continues that amazing growth. Now, there's some ancillary stuff that's subsets of that, like our native asset standard. We should upgrade it to include royalties. So it makes it easy for NFTs to have royalty management and these types of things. And also,
that would be great.
For security tokens and these things. Yeah, so like there's a lot of those sharpen the saw iterations you can do to make it easier for oracles and easier for NFTs and et cetera, et cetera. And that's the point of having a decentralized product backlog, because what that does is it allows these special interest groups to come in and say, I'm getting tired of doing all this complicated work. I don't want to code that. I want the protocol to support that. And if that's 25% of your economic activity on the chain, you're going to do it. That's like programmers. They say, I do the same thing again. Give me some syntactic sugar to clean this up because everybody's doing it. Okay, put it in the language. So that's what we're focused on. Huge task of work. Hundreds of developers, lots of scientists, tons of protocol, tons of R&D, lots of commercial work, and these things. And that's just in our orbit. And then there's all these other projects and things like the Cardano Foundation is really focusing on enterprise and regulators and these things and trying to talk with them, exchanges, and they have a whole roadmap for their stuff over there. And then obviously other entities in our ecosystem are doing their things. And the thing we need to focus on is a coordinating function, is get them all talking to each other, because we don't want replication of effort. We don't want the same thing to be done 25 times,
How many applications, big applications, are in development right now that you can't discuss? Like how secret jobs, secret projects, secret applications, dApps, whatever the case may be. How many of those have not been announced?
So I try to be as transparent as possible, and I try not to create information asymmetries. And so generally speaking, if I'm planning on doing something, I talk about it, unless there's an actual contract that I have that prevents me from talking about that. And what I've tried to do is move away from doing business with Fortune 500 government entities, A, because it's so fucking slow, and B, it's always less satisfying, because at the end of the day, you get this diluted thing, and then they're always just trying to steal everything from you, because they have the customers and they just don't have the tech. And once they get the tech, why do we need you guys? We'll just do our own thing. So I like much more dealing with SMEs, much more dealing with general everyday people. And the advantage there is that we don't really have to keep things private. Like, for example, I have a bioluminescent plant company. So we're genetically engineering plants to glow in the dark. It's called Ghostfire. And it's still kind of running in silent mode, but I've mentioned it. And we actually have glowing plants. So you go in a house, you fucking plants a nightlight. It's super cool. Well, I would love for those plants to be represented as NFTs and unique. And I'd love for those NFTs to generate carbon, and you can mine it. And so you buy a plant, you scan a QR code, goes your wallet. Well, that's a public idea. for a company that's running in silent mode. So I
That's really clever,
that.
kind of like a Tamagotchi, but it's actually related to a real thing. I like
Yeah.
that. That's cool.
And you have an incentive to buy it.
I would
And,
get that for my daughter. I think she would love it.
there is not a person I've told this to that would not buy it. And there's a lot of license potential as well. You can even do glow in the dark pot if you wanted to. Okay. So there's some cool stuff there, and everybody loves this idea. Well, that's the general concept. And I announce it because actually I'd love to work with people. There's probably tons of people like Veritree or others in the ecosystem that are a little further along on certain things. And I'd love to just partner with people and make these things happen. So I tend to announce things, even if they're in earlier days, because I see value in ecosystem collaboration. In terms of actual projects, that we're working on that we can't talk about, I tend not to mention that particular number. But, I do know that there's a lot of people in the Cardano ecosystem now that have private partnerships or relationships, especially with big companies, and they can't talk about those relationships quite yet, whether it be major publishers or car companies or, these types of things. And that's cool because there's so many now that I've lost track of it. In many cases, it never even comes to me. The first I hear about it is over Twitter or these types of things, which is just awesome. That tells you how decentralized the ecosystem is.
Right. That makes sense. I guess I'm just expecting you to know more than I guess you probably should, given the whole reason why you're developing the blockchain to be the way it is to begin with. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, for example, the Huawei relationship with Emergo, no one told me. And I know the Emergo guys. I've known them for like 10 years. No one said, hey, we made this deal with Huawei. I was like, okay. The first I saw of it was somebody tweeting at me, are you comfortable with this? It's like, what? Don't talk to me. It's a different company.
So, there's one thing that actually I'm really interested in, and maybe you won't know a whole lot yet, or you probably won't be able to say, but obviously the news of United States, several states contacting I was it Gregard, I guess, and they said, hey, help us build a blockchain for more transparent blockchain based elections. How far away are we from actually seeing that in use?
So it's not a blockchain issue. It's actually an identity issue. So blockchains are perfect for voting because it turns out a money system is the same as a voting system. In a money system, what is it doing? You have accounts and transactions and you're moving them. So basically, in an election, you just give one token to each person and they send it to their preferred candidate addresses, and whoever has the most tokens wins. So it turns out under the hood, conceptually speaking, blockchains already do voting. It's just what level of privacy do you want to have? The big issue is the identity space. Who is a registered voter or not? And the problem
How do you keep dead people from voting?
Exactly. How do you keep dead people from voting? How do you keep people who aren't residents of the nation from voting? Which is a huge concern. So if we had a strong national identity system, then that would make it super easy because you just take that and use that as the basis for your voting registration. The issue is there are powers that be that want to remove identity from voting.
Right.
And so whenever you come in as a blockchain guy, you're like, oh, okay, well, here's how you keep it secure. Here's how you keep it private. Here's how you be able to check your own vote. Like with that same midnight stuff for verifying claims, you could also use it to verify the integrity of the entire voting system.
Right.
You can check and say, was my vote counted? Was my vote accurately counted? And is the system accurate? Meaning that it balances. So there's no more votes than registered voters, and everybody who registered is confirmed. So there's not dead people or these types of things. We can build all that. That's not a problem. But the issue is there's no SSI stack. There's no self-sovereign identity stack or these types of things. So the national ID system is not working appropriately. Now, both parties fuck with this. So all these people say, oh, we can't do national ID because then the government will know who you are. It's like, you don't fucking know that the CIA and the NSA tracks everybody.
I know that if you have a Facebook account, if you have a credit card, if you have a utility bill.
Come on. They just use that as an excuse. If we had a national ID system that was appropriately constructed, what we could use with that is get a password-free internet. We could do all kinds of things with it because you can use zero knowledge proofs where you don't reveal who you are, but you do verify that you're a human being and not a bot. And you can actually use it for login systems and all kinds of things. And you can remove linkability and association. There's privacy preserving technology for that. That is math guaranteed, not people guaranteed. So the issue is because we don't have this type of approach, unless you work in a clearance setting, like with a CAC card or something like that, we don't have the tech, to do that there. So yeah, they say we want a voting system. We're like, okay, we can get you to 75%. And then it's up to you guys to sort out the 25%. So what good is it to count with high fidelity fake votes? It doesn't stop the dead people from voting. It doesn't stop illegal residents from voting. It doesn't stop fraudulent registrations or these types of things. You're only as strong as your weakest link. inside your system. And you need both a strong identity system with good cryptography and a strong blockchain system. Only when you have those two components together can you actually have a secure election system. So it's very nice that states are engaging, but the states are going to have to take an extra step and change the state ID system as well. And if they do both of those things, I'm actually incredibly optimistic that we can have a secure and fair elections. And it's a topic I care a lot about. I've built like 7 voting systems in my career, whether it be Catalyst or the on-chain system for Cardano or all the papers we've written about it. We're really good at it. And so it's always easy to do the theory, but when you go into application practice, you have to take a step further and realize it's not just that. Then also you need secure environments to vote on. So we have them in phones. For example, Samsung has Knox and Apple has a trusted enclave, as to others, but you have to actually write that software as well. And then that prevents malware or other things from being able to do that, especially if you have a hardware component like a YubiKey or something that's built in. If you combine those two factors together, you generally can have an insanely secure system. So I don't buy this, oh, well, they'll hack in and steal your vote. They already hack in and steal your votes.
Right. I feel like every 2 weeks we see some other database was hacked and all of our personal information was, it's all on the dark web somewhere already. It doesn't really matter at this point.
Yeah, exactly right. So, if the foundation wants to, that's again a conversation we didn't have. The foundation seems to be having it, and that's great. We're happy, but if they want to bring us in, they'd have to talk to us about it. And it hasn't quite come up. They do a lot of commercial stuff these days autonomously, but it is our area of expertise. We understand e-voting very well and identity very well, and we have dedicated products like Atala Prism, for example, for these things. And I wouldn't take a deal with the government unless they were willing to do the whole thing end to end, because I don't think it's ethical. Right. It makes no sense to build a boat with 3 sides. You're just going to leak, and all the water is going to come in, right?
Right. I don't know if you realize this, but you just started a new trend. I mean, there's 7,500 people watching this right now, and now everybody wants glow in the dark weed.
I would love to do a license deal with Snoop Dogg and Mike Tyson, have them compete against each other, who can sell the most glow in the dark pot. I think this is how we get the real world adoption that Cardano desperately needs.
Screw World Mobile Token, screw cornucopias. You got glow in the dark weed. That'd be hilarious. Now, this is the last question I'll ask about Midnight, because I get this question constantly, and I'm doubting you're going to be able to even answer it. Everybody wants to know, obviously we see, blockchains like Solana, and we see how they've been kind of building their volume, building a lot of stuff up between airdrops and meme tokens, right? And everybody is looking for that, like a big airdrop. And apparently, since the announcement of Midnight, everybody is saying, when or if is there going to be an airdrop of Midnight, when we could look at and expect that, and how might that be brought to the public?
Yeah, I'm going to punt on that one. We have some plans. We have some ideas. We're thinking about it. And I think there's going to be something that people are very happy about. And my hope is it can be done in a way to unify the whole cryptocurrency space to care about Midnight. So we bring a lot of people together, and it'll really get people to care about Cardano in ways they didn't before. And I don't like the idea of an airdrop where you just get something for free. I like the idea of an airdrop where you get it as compensation for participation in something to launch the network. So I think there's a way to do this and make your airdroppers miners. And we're thinking about it, and we have a lot of protocols, and it's more of a question of how to put it into an ecosystem that sustains itself and actually gets the adoption that we need. Now, also, we're custodians of this idea of how to do this in a dual token model for all partner chains, because I want this to be a model that gets reused, kind of like the ISPO or other things for distribution again and again by all the partner chains. So when somebody builds a partner chain, it's not just a technology, it's a distribution model as well for a fair distribution across the cryptocurrency space to bring a lot of people in. So that's why it's a little bit more complicated, because it was just Midnight, we can always just pick something and do something. But if it's beyond that, and you're really thinking like, how would this be used for 10, 15, 20 projects to utilize it and bring it across the board, that's very important. Another side of the tokenomics is also support for SPOs. People talk, if I'm an SPO and I run a pool, I'd like to be paid to do that. It's a business. The problem is the inflation rate keeps going down. So either the price of ADA has to go up or the transaction volume has to go up in order for you to make the same amount of money. Okay. Well, what if you have partner chains? You're now compensated in multiple tokens to do work as opposed to just one. So your profitability rapidly increases for each partner chain as a SPO. So my goal is to try to get a lot of partner chains into the ecosystem, because what does that mean? You get more SPOs, which means you get more decentralization inside the system, and you get higher quality SPOs because of competition. So you get more infrastructure like Mithril and Hydra channels and these types of things. So there's an internal consistency there. So this model opens up that reality, and if it's done right, will really decentralize Cardano and make it much more appealing to be an SPO. So it's a hard question, and there's a lot of really good people thinking deeply about it, working on it, and I think we'll crack it, and we'll be able to announce it soon. And I think a lot of people will be very excited about what it brings to the ecosystem, especially for cross-chain transactions.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I mean, I've been actively trying to kind of maintain an understanding as to Midnight's direction and where it's going and what it's going to be capable of, and who might be jumping on board to build with it. And I'm pretty pumped about it. Speaking of other chains, I'm actually curious. As a quick question, what do you know so far about Apex Fusion as it relates to Cardano, and how do you feel about that project as in terms of like what you know about it right now?
Well, there's a lot of ex-IOGers in the world. Like Alex Chirpinoy is a great example. He used to work for me for years, and he went off and created ScoreX, and he created Ergo, and that's a big and vibrant, nice, beautiful ecosystem. And we're, of course, on great terms. So the Apex Fusion, a lot of the people that are in that company are former IG employees. They were part of our commercial division. And when we kind of pivoted a little bit, moved away from professional services and moved into more strategic ventures, they had to find a new home. So the chief commercial officer, Jerry, founded Apex Fusion, and they seem to have put together the best of 4 blockchains. They've taken things from Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polygon, and Cardano, and they seem to have a commercial model for all of that. And I always view it, it's like innovation's great. In ex-IOG years, they're part of our culture. They were our people. I imagine that they took the best with them. So I think that it gives them a leg up. And I'm very happy that there's some Cardano DNA inside their stack. What's not clear to me, though, is the tokenomics side of what they're doing, and if there's a distribution to people in Cardano land, and how that's going to bridge to Cardano. Like, for example, Milkomeda from DC Spark, which was led by ex-Emergo people. That was Nico and Sebastian. They left Emergo and went and created DC Spark. Milkomeda is still connected to Cardano. Even though they play in Mina and they play in Algorand, there's still a Cardano legacy there, and there's a lot of cool stuff. So I would hope that Apex Fusion has the same approach, but we haven't had any communication with the team, and all we know is the stuff that's been tweeted and put on the website. So it's kind of difficult to say. And I imagine that this would be actually a pretty good candidate in the future for pivoting to the partner chains framework,
Right.
because then that creates a uniform model for how these things would be launched and work with Cardano. But they're probably in a different direction than that. So we wish them well, and there's no animosity or adversarial stuff on our side. And we think that anytime somebody innovates using technology that we came up with combined with other technology, it's actually pretty interesting, and you learn a lot. Like, we learned a huge amount from Ergo with their use of extended UTXO and Sigma protocols, and it helped inform things like reference inputs and other technology that we brought back into Plutus. They were a little ahead of us in certain things, and it really helped us out. So if there's some novel ways that people are using, like a chimeric ledger, combining accounts and UTXO together, that actually bodes very well for how our contracts would work with the EVM and back, which is competitive-wise a very important thing to understand. So this is one of those things that it's actually exciting from a technology viewpoint to watch and see how it's implemented, because if it's successful, it gives you a lot of data that you can then pull back into the main ecosystem for the benefit of everybody in Cardano land. But of course, it's up to them to do everything that anybody who's launching a cryptocurrency, regardless of the layer, has to do. You have to get adoption. So you have to commercialize. You have to actually get projects to come. You have to get transaction volume. You have to get TVL. And that's a really hard game. Very few people do it super well. We're in the top 10 or 11, depending on the index you use. And we've been there for a long time. But we also get brutally criticized, and we're one of the good ones.
Right.
So, if you're going to enter a set of 35,000 projects or more, you have to kind of explain how you're different. And that's incumbent on that team to be able to explain that. And it can't just be interoperability at this point. That worked really well 5 years ago or 6 years ago, but there has to be competitive differentiators above and beyond that. And, we wish them well, and we hope they find those differentiators, and they build themselves a vibrant ecosystem.
I'm curious. This isn't even one of my written questions, but I'm curious, given where we're at in the market and everything going on with the ETFs and just it looks like there's a pretty big transition going on, and a lot of newcomers are entering the space through these ETFs that aren't really privy to crypto yet. They don't know much about it other than, you know, Bitcoin price go up and crashes, right? And now you have a lot of these ETFs and their account reps, and they're kind of selling this obviously to their clientele, and we see that growing. But then you have, like you said, 20,000, 30,000 altcoins on the market, all vying for attention and market cap. How do you see what's happening with the ETFs changing the overall, you know, dominance of Bitcoin as it compares to the altcoins? Like, how do you see things transitioning from where they've been in the last several cycles to, you know, maybe the end of 2024, early 25? And where do you think the majority of these altcoins end up?
You know, first off, if you do a lot of real estate, you realize that there's a world of difference between a plot of land owned by a real estate investor or a company and a plot of land owned by a rancher who's had 7 generations of their family live there. Okay, it's the same amount of land, let's say, but when you go to buy it, really different conversation. When you talk to people that are transactional, it's just price. That's the only thing that matters, because it's an asset and it's fungible like anything else. So when you have an ETF buyer come in, that's your real estate investor. They're not here because they love crypto. They think crypto's awesome. They're here because it's an asset class. They've historically saw its appreciation. And you know what? They don't care if it's Bitcoin, Buckcoin, or anything in between. It's whatever gives them the best return.
Mm-hmm.
That's a world of difference than somebody who's an OG who grew up with Bitcoin before it was worth anything. And they culturally want to change the world, and they're philosophically invested. It's like, you know, Charlton Heston, you could take the coins from his cold, dead hands. You know, they're not going to sell, and maybe they will, but they only in desperation do so. These are community-driven factors that are behind your liquidity and your price in your ecosystem. So Bitcoin is starting to welcome in more mainstream transactional people. They're starting to sell their land and go from ranchers to real estate speculators, which means that there's no brand loyalty and there's no philosophical loyalty inside it. It becomes a very transactional base. So when you look at a lot of these altcoins, they tend to have, if they're viable and sustainable, a really strong core of people that are philosophically motivated, and they're less transactional, because that's usually how you get these things started and they move. Then, like Bitcoin, over time, they start moving in the other direction, and those OGs disappear and they're replaced by more transactional people. And what's interesting about that is if it happens too quickly, what ends up happening is the coin disappears. Like, look at EOS or NXT or these types of things where they seem to be like a big deal, but they got transactional too quickly, and then people just divested. And then the minute they weren't the pretty girl, everybody left, all the liquidity left, and it fell down on coin market cap. So it seems to be the only coins that really survive long-term are coins that hold on to their philosophy and reinforce that and have mechanisms to keep people motivated by that. Otherwise, if you go complete transactional, you burn out and you lose your value very quickly in 2 or 3 years. So that's why on-chain governance is so powerful, because you get every holder into a participant and they talk and think around the ecosystem. Even if they came for price, they may actually stay for the philosophy and mission. And they tend not to leave, and it keeps cohesion there. So any project, you know, if they're doing it, I say, don't tell me about the technology. That's a means to an end. Tell me about your community. And tell me about what makes your community unique and special and interesting, and why somebody would want to be a member of that community. In some cases, you can do it way too wrong. Like Bitcoin, for example, with maximalism, it's a cult. And if you deviate from any of the doctrine, you're a criminal, scumbag, shitcoiner, evil person. Even if you're like a core developer and you decide to start playing around with other things, oh, how dare you betray the religion? That is not very welcoming and friendly, and it's exclusive. So over time, you have a heat death and you lose your community. So I would argue that's actually hurting Bitcoin's long-term prospects and growth. And it's creating a reality where these transactional people, even though they're holding the price up right now, when they leave to go do other things, they divest, it means your market dominance will actually decrease. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I get exactly what you're saying, and for those that don't know, I'm a priest of Cardano. If you know, because since I'm a leader of the Cardano cult, I figured I'd wear the black shirt and I've got the little collar and everything. No, I get that. And you know, one of the things that has been bothering me, even though I've been very guilty of it, is the tribalism of all of our cults. I mean, you know, we're all referenced as cults because we are believers, right? We are we're fanatics, but we are fanatics for different reasons entirely. And I think fundamentally the majority of those that believe in Cardano, what's being built, its use case potential, and you for that matter, is the future of blockchain. And I think many people that are in Cardano understand where the future of blockchain is going and what's being built as Cardano and now even Midnight to facilitate those changes, that transition from this centralized present state we've been in into this more decentralized, empowering the people, kind of the sovereign choice of a system. And then you have others who are just like, number go up, we don't care how, we don't care who gets hurt, as long as we're one that benefits. And then there's this kind of back and forth. And I feel like so many people are trying to FUD the good guys while they're trying to catapult the bad actors. And ultimately it's the public that gets caught up and hurt by a lot of that. And
Right.
and I, you know, I'm all for Bitcoin, you know, and I even saw on Gary Cardone's thing, he tweeted a little video clip of us talking, kind of let everybody know what's going on. There's over 100,000 views on that since yesterday. And there are a lot of people that were giving him shit because he's talking with a Cardano guy and he's a Bitcoin guy, right? And it's like, you know, that tribalism for really no other reason than the fear of somebody's interests or new technologies rising up and then taking away from their market share and ultimately their wealth, right? And I'm not a greedy guy. I never have been. And I, you know, Gary and I talked about that. It's like, I am more about the future. I'm more about what is going to help my children have a good life. How do you stay ahead of the transition of where we're at and to where we're going, and who do I believe are going to be some of the most prominent and best actors in the space to help facilitate those changes. And ultimately that's why I'm here with you. So, okay, we've been at this a little while. I've got a few more questions, and then I'll go let you fly around in your Blackhawk, and pick me up so we could go somewhere. How about that? Let's talk a little bit about Hydra, because Hydra is something that, you know, I definitely had some misunderstandings of early on. And I thought it was going to be just an overnight scalability solution that was going to send us into a million TPS. And, you know, we already discussed the TPS nature of Cardano, but, you know, there were some misunderstandings that I had very early on. And so my questions are this. So where are things, for one, in terms of where Hydra is at? And explain how Hydra gets adopted and grows as it relates to stake pool operators and future development. And does each application have to develop with Hydra in mind, or is it in the hands of the stake pool operators to adopt specifically, and then it just spills out into any application on the blockchain?
Yeah, Hydra principally is middleware for app developers. And then there's a question of who hosts. SPOs are a natural target to host, but you also can self-host, or your users themselves could potentially host depending upon how it's used. So the easiest way of understanding Hydra is understanding like it through a use case or an application. So let's say we're playing poker. We all come together. Now, what are we really trying to accomplish with a blockchain-based poker game? Are we trying to, for the rest of time, every hand that we had, every bet we had, preserve that indefinitely? Or do we want some basic guarantees that it's a fair game? I can't see your cards, you can't see my cards until we reveal them, and that when we end the game, we actually get paid. You know, we get our money in and out. So layer twos like Hydra, what they really do is they allow you to run something like that in a way where you have as minimal of an on and off ramp as possible. You have money going in, you have money going out, but then all that logic can run somewhere else. And if you build it in just the right way, you have the same security guarantees as if you ran it on Cardano. Well, what does that mean? It means I can have 5 billion poker games going on with billions of players, all these things happening every year in my system. And I may have a collection of just a few 100,000 transactions for the bulk withdrawals and entry points to that. Ordinarily, we would do this with centralization. You'd have a server somewhere, people like with Coinbase or something, they join, they deposit their money, they do some stuff and they pull it out. So there's tons of those use cases, DEXs, video games, NFT marketplaces, tipping applications where you want to tip somebody or something like that. And you bundle all the tips together at the end of the day and they come and pay the content creator, these types of things. So that translates to millions or billions of transactions. if it's a big, widely used network. World Mobile is another example. It's like your cell phone, you're topping up your minutes or you're topping up your data. Okay, well, if you have 5 million customers and they're topping up their data on a daily basis, do you really want to have billions of transactions, as they go through on a monthly basis from just data top-ups? Does that provide any value to the Cardano main chain? No, but they want to use a blockchain because they want censorship resistance. They want security. They want irreversibility and immutability. They want finality. They want all these properties. So Hydra was built for that. And it's a family of protocols. So some protocols like Hydra Tail, for example, those are about microtransactions and high throughput. So those lots of stuff going on like Lightning. Others like the Hydra Head protocols, and these things are more for like, I build it into my dApp and it helps me manage the state of the program or these types of things. Okay, so there's different boats for different floats, and it's an open source project. It's live on the Cardano mainnet right now, and it's versioned. And when we get to version 1, I think that's the first time where we're going to be able to do a lot of really complex stuff like poker games or blackjack games or tipping or these types of things. And if you go to hydra.family, you can follow it real time. There's actually a website for it, and there's a GitHub repo, and you can see the entire roadmap. And there's a lot of Cardano dApp developers like Sunday Swap and other people that are starting to get involved in the Hydra project as developers in addition to consumers. The long-term goal is to build a flavor of different implementations to be used as middleware that people put into their dApp to massively reduce the operating cost, improve the user experience, reduce the transaction volume that happens on chain, and also increase properties like finality, for example, where you get instant transactions or these things. So when you're at the vending machine and you buy something, it settles in a second or something like that. Also, Hydra opens up a lot of cross-chain opportunities because we can start linking it to other networks like Lightning or these things and use it as a bridging mechanism to talk to other related types of systems. So it's a pillar in the scalability conversation, because scalability isn't just about raw performance. It's also about doing things in the right buckets. And it's not the end all be all. You need also roll-ups. You also need some layer 1 improvements. There's a lot of other things. So it's one of the pillars. And what's cool about Hydra is it doesn't require hard fork or soft fork. It's software. There's enough in Cardano that Hydra can be developed independently. So they have a rapid release cycle. The team does releases every 2 to 6 weeks. So there's always something new that's coming, and it's starting to pick up steam as an open source project. And after it gets to the 1.0, it's going to start seeing some diversity and differentiation where Hydra will start going into different flavors like the tail protocol and other such things. And then what happens is if you're building an application, you can look at this like you do Aiken or anything else as a tooling set and say, okay, how do I use this in my app? So I ultimately get lower operating cost, better user experience, lower transaction fees, and also it scales and I can serve more customers. You see, and you have to tune the technology in that direction. So you have a framework, but you have to build on top of that and utilize it in the right way. And if you utilize it the right way, you potentially can match the performance of best-in-class blockchains, in some cases vastly exceed them. It just depends on how you use that technology. What happened in the early days of Hydra is that we were beta testing and doing simulations for Hydra's performance. And what we noticed is that in the way we designed it, the peak throughput of transactions that could be done in an individual head was about 1,000 transactions per second. And
Which
then we said, well,
1,000 per node times the number of nodes. I think I calculated it out to like 88 million transactions a second or something at some point.
Exactly right. So we're saying, well, if you're load balancing and all things are equal and you have all these different nodes, you could have like millions of TPS. And what we were trying to do is make a point that it's not just the stuff that happens on chain that matters and the TPS rate there. It's also how do you use your layer 2 infrastructure? And this plays into what we constructed with extended UTXO. When we created the accounting model of Cardano, it wasn't just about extending what Bitcoin had done. It was also about realizing that extended UTXO is isomorphic with state channels. What that means is when you send transactions into Hydra and back, it's as if they happened in the same place. You can't do this with Plasma in account-based model on Ethereum. It's just by design not possible. You can do all kinds of things to protect yourself and try to make it isomorphic, but Hydra is built hand in glove with our accounting model. So they fit very naturally together, and that's how the world is going. It's not about doing everything on the blockchain. It's just when it ends up on the blockchain, you want security, you want irreversibility, you want privacy, you want immutability, you want basic properties. So create hooks where when it's done somewhere else, you get and preserve your security guarantee, and you know that people can't steal money or cheat in the video game or whatever that particular application is. So that's what makes Hydra so exciting, is that it's kind of doing its own thing, and it's on chain already, and you can download it today and play around with it today. But every few weeks it gets better. So it's one of those things where iteratively it grows and it covers more and more use cases, and it's versioned, and that's completely different than the other cadence of change, which is by hard forks in the system. When people are asking when governance or when, Laos or these things, that's really hard stuff. And every single user has that once it's been upgraded. Whereas Hydra is an application by application specific thing, and it's something that you use to make your application more scalable and more decentralized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If so, could I potentially turn my Crow node? Could I turn that into a Hydra head right now?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
in fact, they're working on ways to make it easy to spin up a Hydra head, and there might even be economic models where when activities occur, it's an additional revenue stream for the particular things that happen inside of that. So I'd encourage your guys to go to Hydra.family, and just there's monthly meetings. They're transparent, they're open, and just kind of join and play around. And actually, I would love to see things like Wargrum or others things in this, because that might be a perfect use case. Large scale NFT drops, GameFi applications, these types of things. It might be actually really well suited there. And what ends up happening is you get centralized server level performance potentially, but it's decentralized because it uses the Cardano blockchain to sort out the security properties of it. That's really the magic of that, and that's the vision, and we're pushing in that direction. And it has a great team. It's one of our best teams around. Sebastian and Arnaud are super bright. They work with the Cardano Foundation. Matthias Bencourt is there, and there's a lot of community members as well doing really interesting things like alternative implementations like Hydrozoa. So it's very fertile, and it's a great example of a true open source project. So no one entity kind of runs that. Everybody's coming together, and the more people who join, it's better because you can take a look at the whole roadmap. In fact, I'll give you a link, and you can see the roadmap real time with Hydra. Let's see your Hydra family.
I really want to turn Crow node into a Hydra head as well. Would that have any detriment to my current delegators, to the people that are staking to my pool right now? Okay, so it's basically just a really good thing in general, even though it's fairly early.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see your project. Yeah. Here we go. So here's the actual roadmap of the Hydra head, and you can see all the features that they're working on real time. So I'll send it over the private chat for you.
Okay.
And if you click on that, you can see these little cards that are there. And so there's version 0.17, and then it shows you what we're planning on for version 1.0 and things beyond version 1.0. And as we and you can see everything that's released on the right-hand side. And as we kind of work our way through this roadmap, every release gets more capable, which means a larger set of applications are possible. So it may be the case that Hydra doesn't cover your applications today, but if you join and you let them know, they say, oh, okay, well, we can change the roadmap or add things to the roadmap, so that we'll build into there. And then they basically teach you how to host it. So basically how to turn it on, how to version it, all this stuff, and integrate it in. So this is the Hydra head roadmap, and it's public. Anybody can see it. I just sent you the roadmap. Yeah. And then on the repo, another link I'll show you. Yeah, here we go, Hydra. So here's the README. So if you go here and you actually scroll down, you can actually see a checklist of shit we've been working on as a project. And you'll see under features with the little rainbow. So the third link I gave you.
Okay, I'm gonna pull that up here.
And if you scroll down to where it says features with the little rainbow, you can see all the things that have already been implemented, and kind of what's next on the roadmap. So there's already 9,300 commits, and if you keep scrolling down, you'll see that there are 19 releases that have been done. There's 39 contributors, so it's really well contributed. And if you keep going down to the README, keep going. Yeah, here we go. Keep going. It explains how to turn it on, how to configure it, but right there under features. So when we first started talking about Hydra, we were at the very first checkbox, like head-to-head protocol, single head per Hydra node, all this stuff. All that's all done in this version. And so then you see later,
I wasn't even aware of this.
Yeah, incremental commit and decommit and optimistic head closure. That's basically what would be required for like a poker game or a blackjack game, or these types of things. And then a modular API for streaming plugins, automated handling of rollbacks, relay capable mesh network, multiple heads per Hydra node, and API load balancing and these things. So the team's just working on it. And as we check those boxes, more and more of your applications could potentially use this as middleware inside the logic. And if you scroll all the way to the right, you can see all the stuff that's already been built. It's right there on the roadmap. Keep going to the right-hand side.
Oh, I see. That's, oh, there we go.
Yeah. And so keep going, see it released. So all those cards are done. And you can just see how many things they've built with it. So it's kind of funny when people are like, Hydra's been canceled or Hydra's no longer a thing. And it was like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know?
I don't think, I think it's, in crypto, we've kind of learned that if people are not talking about it constantly, it must have died, right? Everybody's in this instant gratification, constant state of needing to be told what to consider or what's happening or what's new. And if it gets quiet at all, everybody just assumes the worst because you've got so many other things vying for attention. And, but yeah, no, I knew it wasn't dead. I wasn't aware that so much has been done already.
Yeah.
And I could effectively utilize this now, which I definitely plan to do. So that's actually really cool. I'm going to dive into that more this afternoon.
Yeah, and there's a companion technology called Mithril, which the Hydra team also works on, and that the whole point there is to prove stuff about transactions and the blockchain as a whole without having all of it. So the idea is to get full node security with light nodes. So you want a cell phone, it's almost as if you're running like Daedalus, but you have that same security model, but you're actually running a light client. So that's another really cool thing, and developers can use that in their applications as well. And there's already 20% of the stake pools supporting Mithril and creating those certificates and running them through. So this is our scalability team. They do amazing work, and as you see, there's 39 contributors. A lot of them are outside of IO and the foundation, and they're basically dApps that are interested in this, and they're coordinating, collaborating. And what will happen is after 1.0, I think there's going to be a big surge of resources there to start building parallel types of Hydra. So some are for tipping and microtransactions, and some would be like for dexes, and some would be for other things. And then do you have a framework, and you just kind of pick the one that you need for your application. It's kind of like Rails to Ruby. It's a companion.
Ruby Rails.
Yeah,
I'm talking to developers and building stuff on that. They're like, get the fuck out of here. There's no way I'm touching Ruby on Rails.
Back in the day, it brought MVC, and we all loved it. But it was a framework, and it really allowed it to be much more productive and doing a lot of different things that you cared about. Well, similarly for Hydra is that it doesn't solve every problem, but it solves a lot of problems. And in many cases, those problems are related to operating cost, user experience, and throughput, which is what everybody seems to be caring about. And they're waiting for some brand new protocol to come. It's like, yeah, well, we can put that. We don't want it to be like Solana, where 75% of the time it fails. So it has to be done in a slow and deliberate way. But while you're waiting for that, there may be the case that a more efficient use of Aiken or Plutus or Hydra could actually solve all of your problems for you and your users. And you build these things in parallel, and they have different release cycles. So some are done in weeks and months, and others take years. And you put them all together, that's a roadmap.
So I have a bunch of other questions, but I'm going to save those for another time because they're lesser important, more curiosity type questions. But there is one that obviously I think, I also get hit with constantly. And that is, why does it appear that stable coins tend to struggle on Cardano? What is the overall issue that you might be seeing as it relates to the stable tokens? And I know that I watched one video where you were talking about USDC and the issues that could be potential with Circle and the nuances of that kind of thing. I'm one that I think, okay, I get it. The more stable tokens, the more liquidity, it benefits the ecosystem as a whole overall. But I'm also kind of like, look where we've gotten without that. Now, in the grand scale of things, I do think obviously having a substantial one is pretty important. Okay, people seem to think that I don't think that. I do, but I feel like there's so much emphasis being put on it. What is your stance on that? Where do you see us being, within the next 6 months, maybe, as it relates to having a solid, highly liquid, stable token available and readily available on Cardano?
So there's an all of the above strategy currently in our ecosystem for stable coins, where there's in algorithmic stable coins, there's homegrown stable coins like USDM and others. And there's also, my understanding is there's ongoing negotiations between the foundation and Circle about what would be necessary to get them into our ecosystem, as well as others into our ecosystem. So I look at this kind of like the when Coinbase, where for a long time it was when Coinbase. They kept
I never bothered you about that, Charles.
A lot of people did.
Oh, I did. I hounded you every time I talked to you.
and when it happened, then they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And they went on and found something else. So this is the new Wincoin. So there's an inevitability. Cardano will get what it needs in the stablecoin world. My view, though, is, and it's not my decision, but my hope is it's a balanced view. One of the problems I have right now with Ethereum is 73% of all the economic activity of Ethereum is centralized asset-backed stablecoins, which basically means that the stablecoin issuers actually have the end say in forks. Because when you have a fork, a stablecoin has to pick a winner. They let it ride like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and say, well, we'll see which one goes. No, they have to pick a winner because it has to be one-to-one backed. So you can't double your supply. So if they pick a winner, are they going to pick the winner that believes in liberty and freedom and the community choice? Or are they going to pick the winner that's more palatable to a regulator because they're regulated entities?
Right.
So careful what you wish for. So my view is you can't allow any one stable coin to dominate the entire thing. Also, you don't want to invite in predatory relationships. If you bring a circle in too quickly, you completely drown out and kill all of your homegrown stablecoin options, because it's like Walmart coming to town. The small businesses have a hard time competing with it. So you want them to get a little stronger and differentiate themselves a little bit. Then you can bring a guy in. First, you get better negotiation position because you don't need him as much as you used to. But more importantly, it doesn't devastate already projects that the community has invested in and funded. And so I think there needs to be an all the above.
How much should I be reading between the lines of what you're saying right now?
I think people will be happy from what I've heard, but I don't have all the information because, again, this is not our commercial conversation on the Circle side. That's the foundation negotiating. And I think at some point they will communicate with the community about the output of that, what are requirements of that, and it's community to decide whether that makes sense or not. From our perception, though, we've been doing the Wyoming stablecoin project. That's a fucking U.S. state issuing a stablecoin. I think that's a little better than a Circle. We've also been working with the JED protocol and building that entire protocol up, and there's a vibrant amount of work there. And we've been engaging with a lot of the homegrown stablecoins and having conversations with them about what they need as projects to get where they need to go, because I want it too. I have RealFi Co. It's my microfinance company in Africa led by John O'Connor, and we've already deployed $5 million in loans to people in Kenya. These don't work in a blockchain world unless I have a stablecoin, because I can't lend ADA. It's too volatile. I need to lend something that's pegged to the dollar or an instrument that has low volatility for the purpose of repayment. So my pain is their pain. And so it's not like there's no desire to solve anything. It's just, you got to think in ecosystems. You got to think in leverage and balances. And also you have to understand that different people have different roles. We have more of an innovation role and a consumer role. The foundation has more of a negotiation role. And they're the ones who think about these things. And the community as a whole has to make a decision about what is a priority and what's not a priority. I think a lot of the demand is coming from number go up. They have this perception that if a big stable coin comes, somehow this will magically unlock a huge surge in TVL, and somehow the price of ADA will double or triple. And you know what? That's never been the case when you've actually looked at Circle integration in a cryptocurrency. They'll get a little bit of a bump, but the markets almost always give that back in a short period of time. So don't believe for a moment that this is going to create some short-term speculative bump that is sustainable. It will certainly have an effect, but it's not going to change the long-term prognosis. And there has to be real utility to consume and use that stable coin and do stuff with it.
Everything you just said makes total sense to me. And as soon as you started, like about 2 minutes in, I'm like, okay, I think I get what's going on here. I understand. So, hey, everybody's waiting, everybody's happy. And listen, I think this year is going to be an absolutely phenomenal year for Cardano. I mean, we're finally in a position where so much of the planning and the working and everything has finally come to fruition. Obviously, I think there's some, there's always going to be improvements made. There's always going to be work being done. Obviously, it's one of the most actively developed blockchains out there, and so, before I let you go and jump on your Blackhawk, I will say one thing, and I know some people are going to think I'm crazy, but BitBoy, I have to say that, and I'm going to throw my flag into this thing. BitBoy has been privately and publicly one of the big supporters of Cardano. Now, granted, I converted him, right? As the priest of Cardano, I've converted him. I brought him altcoin daily, like a lot of the big players out there. And I understand what he did with his thumbnail and how it was just basically clickbait to draw attention. I knew what he's doing. I'm a YouTuber. I get it. But I would definitely throw my 2 cents in and say, you guys should hug it out. And because he's he's a supporter, man. He loves you. I know he does. We've talked about you privately. But from there, it's up to you guys. Even if you guys had a wrestling match at Karate Combat or something, and then like shook hands after.
You know, if BitBoy comes to Rare Evo, of course I'll talk to him, and we can do that there. I think we as an ecosystem need to move beyond the clickbait titles and these types of things. And I understand there's a business and there's a game to the whole thing, but to be honest with you, I'm just getting so tired of Cardano getting shit on every day. I really am. You know, and also I'm a little fragile because of crypto banter and Max Kaiser. A little fragile there. I'm going to be fully honest. You know, there's always trauma in these things. I was good friends with Max Kaiser and his wife Stacy. We would have dinner together. You know, we talked to each other. We announced Ethereum and Cardano on his show. His wife asked me for sponsorship and said we could actually like make Cardano a big thing with the Kaiser report. Then all of a fucking sudden, the guy goes batshit insane and not only attacks us, but then relates me to Jeffrey Epstein because one of my companies took money from the Paycheck Protection Program. I mean, it's like you just fucking call me the island pedophile, man, for taking like $400K in paycheck protection for one of my companies in the US. I mean, this is the kind of shit this guy says. It's not okay. And, you know, it's one thing to be like a hype guy or whatever. He just goes down that road. Yeah. So I don't know. And it made me so angry, you know, these things and the insanity. Then Rand Newer, he's a helicopter pilot. I have the Blackhawk. We talk all the time about it. He's always friendly to Cardano. Very nice. And then somewhere out of nowhere, he says, it's going to die and it's a dead project and everything's falling apart. And I'm like, really? Really, it's just we had this great relationship, and now you're just.
I think like, money talks with some of these guys more than they let on.
And I'm like, and I look at Ben, and he does the thumbnail.
Ben's had some fun with Rand Nooner. I don't know if you've seen any of those.
I know. But I look at Ben, and I'm like, A2 Ben,
right?
You know, you two, you're just gonna go down this road, and that pattern, and it really bothered me, and I was like, fuck this. I'm not even playing this game because
sometimes you just have to take him with a grain of salt.
With Max Kaiser and Rand to repair the relationship. I did. I said, I'll go on the show. We'll talk it out. Obviously, there's an issue. No. They just went all in. And I started seeing it head in that direction. And I said, I don't even want to play this game anymore.
Yeah.
I've been hurt before. So if he's actually serious and he's still a fan of Cardano.
I think he's very serious. I've known Ben for years. I know he doesn't always make the right decisions and he does some stupid shit, but you know, we've had talks about it and I've told him very explicitly what I thought and he agrees and he always hears me out, but he is a big supporter of Cardano. I know he is. I know he holds a lot. And when I saw the video, I did a response video immediately. And I'm like, listen, this is just Ben trying to work the algorithm. And then I saw you guys engage each other on Twitter. And I'm like, oh, Charles pissed. This isn't a, what was it? Tar baby. What'd you call whoever the other guy was?
Oh, we can't use that term.
I don't
no, molten tar.
I don't even know what.
Molten tar monster. You're talking
car
about
monster or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, what did I just say? I don't know. Like, something to do with tar and him being toxic, right?
We're gonna get canceled if we use certain terms. You gotta be careful there, crypto.
I don't know what I just said. I've heard it before. But yeah, and I'm just like, this isn't the same thing. Like I knew it wasn't the same thing, but I also knew that you were probably taking it like, oh, now it's you too. And I totally get both your stances. I get what he was trying to do, and I totally get your frustration with it. But you know. And you know, I haven't even talked to him about it, but I'm just like, I know Ben's game and I know where you're at with all these people just constantly just trying to throw shit at you.
Right.
And mostly it's like people attack what they fear. And when it comes to other blockchains and people holding other blockchain tokens, they fear Cardano if they don't have any, if they're not a part of the ecosystem and they're not benefiting from your work. And so it's easier for them to try and shove you down and try to hold it down. And, you know, it is frustrating. It's frustrating for me too. Having been a part of this since 2017, it's frustrating for me to see, even in my own chat through this, I can see some of the haters and the trolls and the people who just don't understand. But I think don't ever forget, Charles, that myself included, and everyone that is a part of my channel, a part of my community, and many, many others out there, we're here for you. We support you. We support Cardano. We're glad to be a part of it. It means a lot to us, and we're not going any fucking where, no matter what any of these tar monsters have to say. So don't ever forget that.
I appreciate it. And it's always fun being on your show. You know, I said, hey, I'm sorry I've missed a few windows, and I felt bad about the whole ranch interview. I had a scheduling conflict and I had to leave the ranch, and so I lost internet. So I'm glad we were able to spend 2 hours together. I'm always seeing what you're up to, and I can't wait to see you at Rare Evo.
Yeah, I definitely plan on being there at this point. So,
all right.
All right.
Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Charles. I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Thank you guys for joining us on Twitter and YouTube. Until next time, crow your coins. We'll see you soon.